Good morning. It's Sunday. It is the 25th, and I'm going to do something live for the first time. Nothing staged, nothing phony. I'm going to remove all of these clamps and see what the result is. So here we go. These have been setting up all overnight. These joints have been unmolested. I've left them alone. It is 8 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, and I am just going through one by one, removing the clamps. Oh, let's see how the epoxy's set. This piece of sandpaper is sticking. Okay. I already feel like it has solidified. It has none of the wobble that it had before. Let me put some of these clamps away to keep this area neat before I flip everything over. Okay, we're going to flip it over. Okay, well, I could see that I need to put this piece of lighting back in. Yeah, it's still got the back heaviness. Hold on one second. Okay, put the okay, it still has the heaviness in the back end. I need to attach this, and I think I'm going to need to glue it in before I close up the saucer, because I don't want any of these little strips jumping out of place once the saucer's closed up. And that's today's goal. Today's goal is to close up the saucer and let that sit overnight tonight. That's a big important joint, so I need to finish up the wiring to wire the top to the bottom, and then insulate everything and get ready to close up the saucer today. But let me just, okay, the nacelles look pretty good. They look pretty well aligned. There's some joint work here. Like I said, those two seams on the front and back, this seam here and that seam there, are going to need to be addressed and cleaned up and all of that kind of stuff, and that'll happen. But the nacelles seem to be, now the camera is distorting them a little bit because of the fisheye lens effect, but they seem to be good and true and parallel. I can just feel how strong those pylons are now with the with all of the gluing and epoxying that went on in there. I have to clean up a little bit of overspill on the epoxy, and then of course I'm going to put a little bit, maybe a little bit of spot putty on the actual seam there and clean up those seams. Now in the front, you're supposed to have that raised detail, so I'll leave that. But I had a person ask me how strong that joint was on the first ship I did. No, I'm not gonna. On the first ship, I could pick the whole ship up by the back engine, and the joint was fine. But that first ship was a hell of a lot lighter because it didn't have nearly the electronics in it. It only had single bulbs here and there, and it didn't have any of this, and it certainly didn't have a stand attached to it. So no, I'm not going to try to pick up the engine by the back and show you how strong those joints are. They are plenty strong, and that's really all I'm going to need to tell you. Give me a second here, and I will plug in the circuit. And there she be. The cells are gladly spinning. That's got that. Okay, now while I had the black paint out to paint the nacelles yesterday, I did go ahead and paint that area above the deflector dish, the photon launcher. I did paint that the black. Now there's a little bit more detail painting that needs to go on in there. But look at that, the deflector dish. That's quite nice. The bottom of it is blowing out on the camera, but it all looks like the top does, as far as the light shining only through those fins. So today's goal for the afternoon is to wire up the saucer and do the join here, which is the last big piece of construction, and all the parts have been used. I don't have any parts rolling around left on the box, so I must have managed to use everything up. And then once I see how this turns out, I can address this seam, which you can see is quite glaring at this point. There's even a light leak, so I can take care of that. But then the detail painting is all that's left after that. Okay, I'm going to backtrack on a little bit of what I said earlier. I'm just laying the saucer top on the top of the ship. It's not wired, it's not glued. I just wanted to see what happened to the weight issue, and it brought it right back into balance. So I'm not going to have to put any additional weight on the inside to bring the front back down into a line. Just the additional weight of the top saucer piece is enough to pitch it back forward. So the balance, fretting about the balance was for naught, as they say. Okay, get ready to attach the top of the saucer to the bottom of the saucer. Now the important thing to think about in a time like this is staging. You don't want to have to string wire all the way across town just to get these two parts to work on. So you put, I've got this the top of the saucer sitting on this clamp bottle, something to keep it close so that the amount of wire that needs to be strung across to join these two things up is minimized. By the same token, you just don't want it hanging off of the side, you know, and being sloppy like that. You really want it up and visible and where you can see everything. So the secret is to run shorter jumpers between the three circuits. Now I've got the 9-volt circuit that I need to join up. I have the antenna control circuit. I'm sorry, this is the 9-volt circuit. This is the antenna control circuit because it goes to the double blinks. And this is the single spot, or the single strobe, that has to join this wire. So what I'm going to do is put some little jumpers on one side or the other and seal up and use some of that liquid tape to close up the exposed connections, and that will be the next step. Okay, next up, all of the wires have been joined across. They have been soldered together. They have been heat shrinked to cover up any exposed wiring, especially around all of this metal tape. The next step is a biggie, and that's to just flip the whole thing over and glue it down. Now, this, like the neck joint, the saucer top joint, is a one-time and one-time only, and you better get it right type of joint. It's very well done. It is especially clean around the edges, but there's only one shot at it, I think, to get it right. Now there's two main joining parts. You have a bead all the way around the perimeter that's going to do the pretty work, and then you have the 5 pins that are going to do the major structural holding it together work. My attack on this is going to be two-pronged. I am going to put 5-minute epoxy in, a little bit inside each of the sinkholes here where the pins go. I am going to put Tenex around this rim, actually laying it in this edge. Now I'm going to scratch my head and think about that a good long while to see whether or not Tenex is my best, whether it's my best solution or not. Tenex will work itself well down into that seam, but I'm wondering, see, it dries out pretty quickly too. I mean, if I could put Tenex on there, and by the time I get around to actually attaching the two of them, it's going to be dried out. Tenex works better when you can like spread the seam out a tiny bit and then run it down into the seam and mush it back together. That's where Tenex seems to work better. The long setting 5-minute epoxy will allow the time to get these connection points fully compressed down to each other, and with a clamp put on it, clamping only at those connection points. The connection points might not be easy to find once you're in the heat of battle. So what I've done is I've taken a Sharpie and I made a tiny mark on the last remaining mask for the upper ring that is still in place. And there's a tiny mark there that basically tells me where to put the clamp, so that I'm getting it right over those pins. I know you can kind of feel around, but some of this stuff has to happen pretty quickly, and the more you can do, there's the mark that corresponds to that pin. The more you can kind of do in advance to get ready, the better off you're going to be. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is fold this over and not line it up with the pins, but press it down just to make sure that everything will lay flat. That'll tell me if there's any binding issues between the fibers and the wiring, and will let me know if best way to tape anything down to make that easy. Then I'll pick it up, spin it a little bit, and push it down on the pins. I think I'm going to maybe take an X-Acto or some other device and maybe just knock the flat top off of these pins, maybe make them rounded a little bit. That'll make them self-centering and easier to go down into the holes. And the thing about using an epoxy, it will allow these things to actually lubricate and slide in there a little bit better, and then they'll seal up. If you just put a glue in there, the glue might act a little bit too quickly and actually start melting the pins in the edge, and you won't get a real good chance to push those down. Because if it were one joint, that's fine. That's a snap. You put that down and you're done. But when you've got essentially 5 joints that you want to make up real quickly and they're not right next to each other, then you want a slower moving glue or slower acting glue that will allow you to do more positioning before it starts to set up. But that's the next step. Okay, where we are is I have sealed up everything. All the wiring has been joined and taped down and shrink sealed and all of that good stuff. And I have positioned the saucer back on top of itself. And what I'm doing now is, the pins are not engaged. It's a little bit off center, but what I'm doing is making sure that it will compress down into place and it doesn't short out anything, and all the wiring remains happy, so that I can take it apart and then glue it back in its proper place. I'm just making sure that everything still works, everything's still lit. This is my last chance to do any revisions inside before I seal it up now and forever. I can see where I have got fiber optics that are laying on top of each other, and what might need to get a little bit of trim work done or repositioning work done to alleviate some of the strains that are on them. Okay, slight deviation from plan. Moved it into position. I nibbled away a little bit at the strip lights where the fiber optic bumps up against them. I had them on the whole time just to make sure I wasn't interfering with your electrical function. Everything's cool there. I'm lining up the pins, and you have to do a little bit of twisting and tweaking with the saucer to bottom to get the top pins to line up. So I think I'm going to do is go ahead and mix up some 5-minute epoxy, put it in the bottom of those pinholes, and line up the pins, get the pins all lined up, get them clamped just over the pin areas, and then I'll worry about dressing the seam later with the 10X. I might have to, twist them apart a little bit with an X-Acto to kind of spread the seam a little bit apart, and then let the 10X seep in there. But I don't think I'm going to be able to do everything simultaneously like I was hoping before. So I think it's going to be a big question of getting the pins in and clamped, and then come back and dressing that seam. So that's the next step. Okay, it's done. We got a metric ton of clamps going around it, but and I use some more of that sandpaper trick because now the smaller clamps are there for moral support. It's these big clamps that are right over top of the pins that are doing the man's work today, and the smaller pins are just helping take some pressure off of those by also helping to align the edge up. I am going to have to go back in and either with a small needle or the edge of a toothpick or something, but to seep the 10X in around the rest of that ring. I'm going to have to do that at a later time, but this is set up. It is all lit up. It is doing what it needs to do. Now, there is a bit of a gap, I have to confess. There is a bit of a gap above the impulse deck, on the saucer above the impulse deck, where it did not join as tightly as the rest. Now, I can take care of that later on. Let me see if I can get in close to it. Hold on. There, you can see it. Let me try to hold this camera steady. There you can see that it's a rather noticeable joint. None of that has been glued yet, and a lot of it does press down into place. And what I'll do is just wait for this when I can take the clamps off of it. And I think the real reason that happened is because the red LED strip is a little fatter than the whites, or maybe it's just sitting up a little bit higher, but I think it's the top of that strip that's bumping up against the top of the saucer. So like I said, it'll press down, but it's not something I want to take care of right now. I want those other joints to set up nice and good before I come back and deal with that. And I've got some joints to let me zoom back out, sorry. I've got some gaps to fill. I've got oh, those night lights coming down the pylon are kind of nice. These worked out well. But I've got a joint up in here on both of them that I've got a little bit of gap to fill. Let me see if I can zoom in on that. A little bit of gaposis to fill. And plus those top of the saucers need to be painted that light blue color anyway. So that needs to be tended to. The seam between the front and back of that saddle, that needs to be tended to. Let me, like I say, I'm being very gingerly with this. so that it does not disturb those seams that are those pins that are setting up. Lots of detail painting to be done. Certainly no premature finishing here. I still have a long way to go, and but I am starting to think of what the next project will be. And if you've got any suggestions, I can show you the stack of things I've got to build. I may take a break and not build another Enterprise right away, or I might go and do the other 350 TOS that I've got sitting on deck. But this is setting up now, and it is 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. I am going to let this alone for a while and ponder what to do next.